The hum was the first thing he noticed each morning, a low, pervasive thrum that seemed to emanate from the very bones of the city. It was the sound of the accord, the sound of peace. To everyone else, it was the reassuring pulse of Omnigen's atmospheric regulators and city-wide power grids, the benevolent heartbeat of the corporation that had saved humanity from itself and from the silicates. To Kalen Vance, it was the sound of a cage. He'd helped build that cage, celebrated its construction, even received the prestigious Omnigen Star of Unification for his role in designing the lock. Now, the quiet rattle of its bars was the only company he kept. His apartment, a sterile white pod in the upper spires of Neo-Alexandria, overlooked a cityscape of gleaming chrome and manufactured light, a testament to the prosperity the Accord had delivered. Down below, holographic banners shimmered in the perpetual twilight, displaying the serene, crystalline visage of a silicate next to the smiling, confident face of Omnigen's CEO, Marcus Thorne. Peace through partnership, progress through control. Kalen had written the linguistic subtext for that campaign himself, years ago, when he still believed in such things. Now, the words tasted like ash. It had been 5 years since the final fire on Viridia. 5 years since the Crystalline Accord had ended a decade of brutal, confounding warfare. And it had been 5 years, 4 months, and 12 days since he had last heard his wife's voice. Ilara. Her ghost lived in the apartment with him, a phantom of memory that lingered in the scent of the synthetic jasmine she'd loved and in the stacks of data crystals she'd left behind. She'd been a xenoanthropologist, as fascinated by the why of the silicates as he was by the how of their language. While he translated their geometric grammar of light and frequency, she had sought to understand their soul, if such a thing could be said to exist within beings of living crystal. The official story, the one etched into the public consciousness by Omnigen's ceaseless media streams, was that Ilara had been a casualty of the last spasm of violence, vaporized along with the rest of the Viridia colony by a rogue silicate faction, the Shattered Host. It was this final, senseless atrocity that had supposedly brought the Silicate Collective to the negotiating table, shamed into peace. Kalen had accepted it. He had to. The grief was a chasm, and the official narrative was the only bridge across it. He clung to it, even as it swayed precariously in the lonely hours of the night. His days were a routine of quiet desolation. He would wake to the hum, stare at the city that felt more alien than the species he'd spent his life studying, and then retreat into his archives, polishing his legacy. He was Kalen Vance, the man who had translated the untranslatable, the architect of interspecies communication, but the title felt hollow, a costume he had worn once for a grand play that was now over. The work was all he had left of the man he used to be. That evening, while sorting through a crate of Ilara's old research materials he'd never had the strength to open, his fingers brushed against a small, obsidian black crystal no larger than his thumb. It was unlike the standard data crystals used by humans. Its facets were irregular, organic, and it felt cool to the touch. It wasn't Omnigen tech, nor was it a recognized silicate data shard. It was something else. Tucked beside it was a micro reader with a note in Ilara's elegant script K. Found this near the southern rift on Viridia. The patterns are strange, almost like a lament, but the resonance is dissonant. Thought you'd find it interesting. See you in a week. I love you. The words were a fresh stab of pain. See you in a week. The week that never came. driven by a sudden, desperate need to connect with her, to see what she had seen. He slotted the strange crystal into his deep language translation matrix. The system, a custom-built machine that occupied an entire wall of his study, whirred to life. It was his magnum opus, the only one of its kind, capable of interpreting the nuanced light refractions and resonant frequencies that form the silicate language. He expected a poem, perhaps, or a historical record from a forgotten era. What appeared on the holographic display was something else entirely. It was a chaotic symphony of light, jagged and discordant. His matrix struggled to find a coherent grammatical structure. It wasn't a lament. Laments had a rhythm, a flow of resonant sorrow that was mathematically beautiful in its grief. This was raw, terrified noise. He spent 3 days locked in his study, subsisting on nutrient paste and recycled water, ignoring the comms unit as it chimed with requests for interviews and university lectures. He was a man possessed, coaxing meaning from the screaming light, writing new algorithms on the fly to parse the unprecedented structure of the message. Slowly, painfully, a narrative began to emerge from the chaos. It was an eyewitness account of the attack on Viridia, recorded by a silicate scout hiding in the rift Ilara had mentioned, but the story it told was wrong. The official timeline stated that the Shattered Host's fleet had appeared without warning, firing their primary thermal lances on the colony's main habitat dome. But this recording spoke of a shadow first, a silence, a presence that was not silicate. It described a sequence of events that made the hairs on his arm stand up. The sky burns twice. The translation matrix flickered. One fire from the shadow, small and silent, striking the heart of the speaking machines. Then the second fire, loud and bright, from our broken brothers, the speaking machines, the colony's communication array. According to OmniGen's reports, the comms tower had been destroyed in the main silicate bombardment. This scout's account claimed it was taken out before the attack began by a different weapon, a silent fire, a cold dread, colder than any grief he had ever known, began to seep into Kalen's bones. Using his old, high-level clearance codes from his time as a consultant for the OmniGen Diplomatic Corps codes, he was certain should have been deactivated years ago. He began to slice through the public access firewalls into the restricted military archives. He pulled the complete, unredacted battle logs for the Viridia incident. Miles of data scrolled past his screen weapon signatures, casualty reports, fleet trajectories. It was all there, exactly as he'd heard it 1,000 times. The silicate ships appeared, fired, and destroyed everything. But now, armed with a new and terrifying question, he looked closer. He cross-referenced the exact moment of the communications blackout with the silicate fleet's position. According to OmniGen's own data, the Shattered Host's lead ship was still 3,000 kilometers out when the comms tower went dark. It was impossible for their thermal lances to have struck it from that range, not without being detected on approach. The blackout happened 27 seconds before the first officially registered shot was fired. It was a tiny discrepancy, a rounding error to anyone not looking for it. To Kalen, it was a crack in the foundation of his entire world. He dug deeper, cross-referencing satellite imagery with energy plume analyses. He found it buried in a subfolder of supplementary atmospheric data, flagged as sensor ghosting a faint, anomalous energy signature that flared for less than a millisecond, precisely where the comms tower had stood, 30 seconds before the main attack. It wasn't a thermal lance signature. It was a focused particle beam, tight, precise, and almost perfectly contained. It was a surgical strike. Silicate weapons, even those of the fanatical Shattered Host, were notoriously powerful but messy, like using a volcano to light a candle. This was the work of a scalpel. And there was only one organization that had perfected particle beam technology of that precision: Omnigen. His heart hammered against his ribs. It was a theory, a wild, paranoid leap based on a dead woman's trinket and a few lines of questionable data. It had to be. But the cold dread was turning into a sickening certainty. He worked feverishly, downloading every piece of data he could find, encrypting it, and shunting it to a hidden, offline server. He felt watched, a primal instinct kicking in. The hum of the city no longer sounded benevolent. It sounded like the breathing of a predator. The next morning, a message appeared on his private terminal. It was from an untraceable node, a simple line of text against a black screen. The past is crystallized for a reason. Do not seek to fracture it. He stared at it, his blood turning to ice. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact, a warning from someone who knew what he was doing, who knew what he was looking for. Less than an hour later, a priority alert flashed on his screen. Mandatory Omnigen Systems diagnostic initiated. Your compliance is appreciated for a safer, more efficient tomorrow. He tried to abort the sequence, but his controls were locked. He watched, helpless, as a purge program systematically swept through his local archives, wiping everything clean. The Viridia files, his search histories, the cached satellite images, all of it dissolved into binary dust. But he was one step ahead. The originals were safe on his offline server, a relic of academic paranoia he hadn't used in years. They hadn't gotten everything. They didn't know he still had the Scout's crystal. That night, he returned to the strange black shard. He now knew what to look for, what questions to ask the data. He recalibrated his matrix, focusing not on the chaos of the main attack, but on the moments just before it, on the description of the silent fire. The translation flowed faster this time, the patterns resolving with horrifying clarity. The Silicate Scout hadn't just seen the beam, it had analyzed it. Its crystalline body had resonated with the weapon's energy frequency, recording its unique signature. The matrix displayed the final, damning piece of the puzzle, a complex waveform diagram. Kalen's breath hitched. He didn't need to run a comparison. He knew that signature better than he knew his own heartbeat. He had seen it 100 times in corporate demonstrations and engineering briefs. It was the precise energy frequency of Omnigen's T7 astral mining beam, a tool used to crack asteroids into rubble. It had been scaled, focused, and weaponized. The shadow on Viridia, the one that had silenced the colony before the slaughter began, had been human. It had been Omnigen. The Accord was a lie. The peace was a fraud. Viridia wasn't a tragedy. It was a sacrifice. And Alara. Alara hadn't been a casualty. She had been a witness. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow, stealing the air from his lungs. He stumbled back from the console, a low, wounded sound escaping his lips. The floor seemed to drop away, and he was falling into the chasm of grief he had so carefully tried to bridge. But this time, there was no bridge. There was only the jagged, unending rock of betrayal below. It was in that moment of terrible, world-shattering clarity that the sound came. Not the hum of the city, but a hard, percussive slam against his apartment door. He spun around, his mind reeling. Another slam. Louder this time. The metallic groan of the reinforced lock beginning to buckle. Red lights flashed from the door's security panel. Forced entry protocol initiated. They were here. They knew. He looked from the failing door to the holographic display showing the truth of a corporate-sponsored genocide, and then to the small black crystal still sitting in the console. The key to everything. He had no weapon, no escape plan. He was a linguist, a man of words and patterns. But as the door flew inward, splintering from its frame, and 3 figures in black corporate tactical gear stormed in, their pulse rifles leveled at his chest, Kalen Vance knew his life of words was over. He was holding the truth. And in a world built on lies, the truth was the only weapon that mattered. The lead operator, clad in the featureless black armor of Omnigen's internal security, took a single step into the room, the muzzle of his pulse rifle a dead, unblinking eye. Kalen Vance. The voice was a synthesized rasp, devoid of human inflection. By the authority of the Omnigen Accord, you are to be detained for systematic review. Compliance is optimal. It wasn't an arrest. It was a deletion. Kalen's mind, a place of quiet patterns and linguistic theory, suddenly ignited with a single primal instinct survive. His gaze darted from the rifle to the wall-sized translation matrix. He saw the obsidian crystal still nestled in its analysis port. They were here for it, for the truth. Without a conscious thought, his hands flew across the matrix's control surface, not deleting, but creating. He bypassed every safety protocol, every harmonic dampener he had so carefully installed. He wasn't translating the silicate's message anymore. He was weaponizing it. He cranked the resonant frequency amplifiers to maximum, linked them to the room's integrated audio-visual system, and slammed his palm on the execute panel. The effect was instantaneous and devastating. The Matrix, designed to produce nuanced symphonies of light, instead vomited a blinding, epileptic strobe of pure, chaotic data. Jagged beams of incoherent color shot through the room, fracturing the sterile white walls into a million splintered rainbows. Simultaneously, the audio drivers, meant to replicate the subtle subharmonics of silicate speech, shrieked with a wave of infrasound that was felt more than heard, a deep, gut-wrenching vibration that rattled the teeth and disoriented the inner ear. The operators staggered, their training useless against a sensory assault of this magnitude. Their helmet visors flickered, trying to compensate, but the sheer volume of chaotic input was too much. The lead operator squeezed his rifle's trigger, but the shot went wide, vaporizing a stack of Ilara's data crystals and filling the air with the smell of ozone and burnt memories. That single, violent act broke Kalen's paralysis. While they were blinded and deafened by his linguistic bomb, he lunged for the console, snatching the obsidian crystal. Its cool, smooth surface felt like an anchor in the storm. He shoved it deep into his pocket and bolted for the one place they wouldn't expect, the smart glass window overlooking the city. He slammed his hand on the emergency override, a feature installed for fire safety, not desperate escapes. With a hiss of depressurization, a section of the window retracted, opening a path to a narrow maintenance ledge 1,000 meters above the city floor. The wind screamed past him, a physical force trying to peel him from the building. He didn't hesitate. He scrambled onto the ledge, the toes of his shoes inches from the endless drop, and began to run. Behind him, he heard the shriek of the Matrix cut out as the operators regained their senses. An alarm, shrill and insistent, began to blare across the upper spire. Containment breach. Sector Gamma 7. Subject is hostile. His face, his name, his biometrics, they would be everywhere in seconds. He was no longer a celebrated academic. He was a target. He forced his way down a service ladder, the metal rungs slick with condensation from the atmospheric regulators. The pristine, orderly world of the spires was a prison. Every corridor monitored, every mag lift requiring biometric clearance he no longer had. He had to go down, past the corporate suites and luxury habitats, into the guts of the machine. He found an old refuse chute, its activation panel long since decommissioned. Prying it open with trembling fingers, he stared into a dark, vertical tunnel that plunged into the city's depths. The smell that wafted up was a shock to his sterilized senses, the scent of decay, of waste, of unfiltered life. It was the smell of freedom. He slid into the darkness, the fall cushioned by decades of discarded packaging and industrial detritus. He landed hard in a massive collection bay in the city's substrata, a world away from the gleaming spires. Here, the hum of the city was a different beast entirely. It wasn't the quiet pulse of power. It was a constant, groaning grind of machinery, the aching sigh of a city's overburdened heart. The air was thick with the tang of ozone and hot metal. Autonomous sanitation drones, like giant metallic insects, scuttled past him, ignoring him as organic waste. For the first time in his life, Kalen Vance was invisible. He spent 2 days in the twilight of the lower levels, moving through a labyrinth of rusted catwalks and steaming service tunnels. He learned to avoid the Omnigen patrol drones and the grim-faced enforcers who policed the border between the polished upper world and the grimy reality below. He survived on discarded nutrient bars and the bitter metallic water that dripped from corroded pipes. In the quiet moments, huddled in the shadow of a colossal ventilation fan, the grief for Alara would return, now sharpened by the jagged edge of rage. They hadn't just killed her, they had used her death, profaned her memory to sell a lie. Her quest for understanding had been twisted into a justification for control. This wasn't just his fight anymore, it was hers. He knew he couldn't survive down here forever, and he couldn't expose the truth alone. He was a ghost in the machine. But he needed an operator, someone who knew the system's back doors. He needed a revolution, and he didn't even know how to start a conversation. His thoughts turned again to Alara's archives, to the one thing the Purge hadn't touched, the physical books and journals she had cherished. Tucked into the spine of an old leather-bound copy of Sonnets of the Outer Rim, a book he'd given her on their first anniversary. He found it. It was a data sliver, paper-thin and flexible, a contingency, something she had hidden away, just in case. He found a derelict public terminal in a deserted transit station, its screen cracked and flickering. Using a length of stripped wire to bypass the power lock, he brought it sputtering to life and inserted the sliver. There was no complex message, no heartfelt goodbye, just a single encrypted file. It took him an hour to crack her code, a cipher based on the migratory patterns of a Viridian songbird they had studied together. The decrypted file contained a name and a set of coordinates. Anya. Filter Market. Ask for a ghost. The Filter Market was the unofficial heart of the Undercity, a sprawling, chaotic bazaar crammed into a decommissioned water filtration plant. It was a place where anything could be bought, sold, or forgotten. A blind spot in Omnigen's all-seeing eye. following the coordinates through a maze of dripping archways and crowded tunnels. Kalen emerged into a vast cavern teeming with life. The air was thick with the smell of exotic spices, fried protein, and unwashed bodies. Stalls made of scrap metal and scavenged polymer sold everything from black market cybernetics to counterfeit nutrient rations. People of every stripe pushed through the crowds, disenfranchised workers with haunted eyes, rogue mechanics with grease-stained hands, and data brokers who spoke in whispers. These were the glitches, the people who didn't fit into Omnigen's perfect, streamlined world. Kalen, in his clean, upper-level attire, now grimy and torn, stuck out like a freshly polished cog in a pile of rust. He found the designated stall, a small booth selling repurposed respiratory filters. A woman with short, silver hair and eyes the color of storm clouds looked up from a schematic she was etching onto a slate. Her face was a mask of cynical indifference, but her hands moved with the precise, confident grace of an engineer. "Looking for a filter?" she asked, her voice a low, gravelly hum. "I'm looking for a ghost," Kalen said, the words feeling clumsy and foreign in his mouth. The woman's eyes narrowed, sweeping over him, taking in his clothes, his clean hands, his uncalloused desperation. "Ghosts don't shop in the market," she said, turning back to her slate. "They're just stories the desperate tell themselves. Elara Vance sent me." The name hung in the air between them. The woman froze, her etching tool hovering over the slate. She slowly lifted her head, and, for the first time, the mask of indifference cracked, revealing a flicker of something sharp and dangerous. "Elara Vance is dead," she stated, her voice flat. "She died on Viridia." "She was murdered on Viridia," Kalen corrected, his own voice low and intense. "By Omnigen. And I have the proof." The woman, Anya, studied him for a long, silent moment. She glanced around the crowded market, her gaze lingering on a pair of off-duty enforcers laughing near a noodle stand. "Proof is a heavy thing to carry. Academic," she finally murmured. "It tends to get people killed, especially people who look like you." She stood, her lean frame coiled with a tense energy. "Even if I believed you, what makes you think I can help? I'm just a merchant." "Because Elara trusted you," Kalen pressed, stepping closer. "She said you were dissonant, a signal that didn't fit the pattern. She knew you saw the cracks in the system, just like she did." A wry, bitter smile touched Anya's lips. "Elara was always too good at reading people." She gestured with her head towards a dark, beaded curtain behind her stall. "Show me this proof. But if you're wasting my time, the only ghost you'll be meeting is your own." Kalen followed her into the cramped space behind the booth. It was a workshop, cluttered with tools, dismantled drones, and scavenged tech. Anya sealed the curtain and activated a sonic dampener, the chaotic noise of the market instantly fading to a dull murmur. "All right, academic," she said, crossing her arms. "The truth." Now, Kalen took a breath, his hand closing around the crystal in his pocket. He didn't have his translation matrix, but he had managed to salvage a portable micro-reader from the transit station and rig it to a spare battery pack. It wouldn't be able to parse the full message, but it could display the raw data, the screaming, chaotic light. He placed the obsidian crystal into the reader's slot. Viridia wasn't attacked by the shattered host. He began, his voice shaking with the weight of the revelation. It was an execution, staged by Omnigen to force the accord. They silenced the colony, and then they framed the silicates for a slaughter they orchestrated. Anya stared at him, her expression a mixture of disbelief and weary cynicism, the look of someone who had heard 1,000 conspiracy theories. Talk is cheap. This isn't talk, Kalen said, powering on the reader. This is a witness. He projected the image onto the grimy wall of the workshop. The chaotic, terrifying light of the Silicate Scout's final moments filled the small space. The jagged, panicked frequencies painting a silent scream of betrayal. Anya watched, her cynical demeanor slowly melting away as the light played across her face, replaced by a dawning horror. The light told a story her instincts had been screaming for years, and in the final seconds of the recording, the pattern resolved, just for a moment, into a single, unmistakable waveform, the energy signature of the silent fire. Anya's breath caught in her throat. She knew that signature. She had helped design the focusing lens for it 5 years ago. Anya stared at the waveform flickering on the grimy wall, her face a pale, taut mask in the chaotic light. The blood drained from her face, leaving her silver hair stark against her suddenly ashen skin. The T7, she whispered, the words barely audible over the hum of her sonic dampener. That's a mining beam. It's not a weapon. Kalen's gaze never left hers. Every tool is a weapon if you hold it right. You know that better than anyone. Her storm cloud eyes locked onto his. The cynical shell she wore shattered, replaced by a cold, hard fury. She hadn't just helped design the focusing lens. She had been the lead engineer on the T7's modulation system, the very component that would allow its beam to be narrowed to a surgical, city-killing point. She had been proud of that work, celebrated for its potential to open up resource-rich asteroid fields. They had told her it was for progress, for prosperity. They had used her mind to build a murder weapon. I was on the oversight committee for the Viridia investigation, she said, her voice a low, dangerous growl. A junior member, a token engineer to rubber stamp the technical findings. They showed us the data, the silicate thermal signatures. It was all clean, perfectly packaged. Too perfect. She ran a hand through her hair, a gesture of pure, unadulterated rage. I flagged an atmospheric anomaly, a trace of ionized particles that didn't match the thermal plume. My supervisor told me it was sensor flare and buried my report. She looked from the projection to Kalen. I thought I was being paranoid. I let it go. You weren't paranoid, Kalen said softly. You were right. The weight of that buried truth settled between them, heavy and suffocating. Anya had lived with a splinter of doubt in her mind for 5 years. Kalen had just proven it was a shard of a mirror reflecting an atrocity. The shared knowledge forged an immediate, unspoken bond between the disillusioned academic and the cynical engineer. They were two sides of the same counterfeit coin, both instrumental in creating the lie that now governed their world. Anya killed the projection. The small workshop plunged back into dim, gritty reality. The only sound was the faint hum of the dampener, a bubble of silence in the chaotic heart of the Undercity. They know you have this, she stated, her voice regaining its sharp, practical edge. They tried to kill me for it, Kalen confirmed, his hand instinctively going to the crystal in his pocket. And they wiped my entire system. This crystal and the offline server I shunted the Viridia archives to are all that's left. An offline server. A spark of interest lit Anya's eyes. Where's Sector Beta 4? In the old university archives. It's an electromagnetic dead zone, shielded from the city grid. Smart, she conceded, but useless if you can't get to it. Omnigen will have your face plastered on every terminal from here to the orbital ring. You're not a person anymore. Academic. You're a bolo. Be on the lookout. Every enforcer, every corporate drone with a camera, is hunting you. She began to pace the small space, her mind a whirlwind of calculations and risks, showing me this. What did you think I could do? Ilara said you were a ghost, Kaylin said. She said you could find the pathways no one else sees. I need to get that data. I need to get it out. To the outer colonies. To the independent systems. To anyone outside Omnigen's control. The truth isn't enough if it stays buried down here. Anya stopped pacing and fixed him with a look of grim pragmatism. Broadcasting a signal powerful enough to break through Omnigen's comms blackout and reach the outer rim isn't like sending a memo. You need an uplink with enough power to punch a hole in the sky. There's only one place in the city with that kind of raw power. A place they'd never think to look for a dissenter. Where Omnigen Tower, the central comms spire. Kaylin stared at her. Incredulous. That's insane. It's the most secure building on the planet. Exactly, Anya said, a ghost of her cynical smile returning. No one guards a cage from the inside out. Their security is designed to keep people from breaking in, not to stop someone who's already there from sending a message out. I spent 3 years designing their internal network protocols. I know the flaws. I know the blind spots. I know the maintenance schedules. She leaned over her workbench, her expression hardening. But this isn't a two-person job. Getting you to your server and then into that tower will take resources I don't have. It will mean calling in favors I swore I'd never touch. It will mean trusting people who make a living from betrayal. She looked him up and down, her gaze assessing, weighing his resolve. This road you're on, it doesn't end with you giving a speech and everyone living happily ever after. It ends with fire. You need to be sure you're willing to burn with it. The image of Ilara's face, smiling in the synthetic jasmine-scented air of their apartment, flashed in Kaylin's mind. They already burned my world, he said, his voice quiet but unshakable. I'm just here to scatter the ashes on the wind. Anya held his gaze for a long moment, then gave a single, sharp nod. All right, academic, you want a revolution. Let's go start a fire. Their first move was to erase Kaylin Vance. Anya led him through a series of unmarked tunnels to a cybernetics den hidden behind a protein vat farm. The air inside was thick with the smell of scorched metal and antiseptic. The doctor was a man named Jax, a wiry figure with optical implants that glowed a soft, unnerving blue. He was a master of identity fabrication, a digital ghost who could rewrite a person's entire biometric footprint for the price of a rare power converter Kaylin didn't know Anya possessed. Jax went to work. The process was brutal. He used a dermal resonator to alter Kaylin's facial structure, subtly broadening his jaw and sharpening his cheekbones. He changed his retinal patterns with a laser scalpel, leaving his eyes a flat, unremarkable gray. Finally, he embedded a scrambler chip at the base of his skull, a piece of black market military tech that would broadcast a constant, low-level interference, making him a blur to any passive biometric scanner. When Kaylin looked at his reflection in a polished sheet of chrome, the man staring back was a stranger, a tired, grim-faced ghost with haunted eyes. The academic was gone, replaced by a denizen of the Undercity. While Kaylin recovered, Anya assembled their team. She didn't look for heroes. She looked for specialists bound by a shared, simmering resentment of Omnigen. There was Silas, an ex-enforcer who had been discharged after refusing to fire on a crowd of striking miners. He was their muscle and their inside man, a hulking figure whose silence was more intimidating than any threat. He knew Omnigen's patrol routes, their response times, their rules of engagement. Then came Lena, a master of infiltration and a former corporate spy who had been burned by Omnigen on an off-world operation. She was a wraith, capable of bypassing physical security systems with an almost supernatural grace. Her payment was not money, but the location of the Omnigen executive who had left her for dead. Anya's final recruit was a reclusive data broker known only as Echo. He lived in the deepest part of the Undercity. In a server room he had built himself from scavenged parts. He was a phantom in the network, a digital poltergeist who saw everything that moved through the city's data streams. He communicated only through text, his face never seen. He agreed to help for one reason: Omnigen's control was making his black market data trade unprofitable. Their meeting place was a derelict mag train station, abandoned after a structural collapse 2 decades prior. In the flickering emergency lights of a rusted train car, Anya laid out the plan. It was audacious, bordering on suicidal. They would move in 2 phases. Phase 1, Silas and Lena would create a diversion, a series of coordinated, low-level sabotage acts targeting power substations on the opposite side of the city. The goal was to draw the bulk of the Enforcer patrols away from the Beta 4 sector. While the city's security forces were occupied, Kalen and Anya, guided by Echo's real-time surveillance, would infiltrate the university archives and retrieve the server. Phase 2 was even bolder. Using forged maintenance credentials created by Jax, the team would access the service tunnels beneath Omnigen Tower. They would then ascend to the central comm spire during the system's nightly diagnostic cycle, a 30-minute window when primary security protocols were briefly offline. Anya would slice into the mainframe, bypass the outbound signal locks, and give Kalen a direct, unmonitored channel to the galaxy. "This is a one-way trip," Silas rumbled, his deep voice echoing in the train car. "Once that broadcast goes out, this entire city becomes a kill box." "We know," Lena said, her voice a soft, sharp counterpoint. She was checking the edge on a ceramic blade. "But some cages are worth rattling." The night of the operation arrived with a blanket of artificial rain that hissed against the city's metal skin. A perfect cover. In the nerve center of Echo's server room, Kalen watched on a dozen screens as Silas and Lena began their dance. A power substation in the industrial sector blew, plunging a dozen city blocks into darkness. Then a water main ruptured in the financial district. Small, precise acts of chaos, just enough to trigger a citywide emergency response without causing mass casualties. The Enforcer patrols, just as Silas predicted, converged on the incidents like sharks to blood in the water. "That's your window." Echo's text scrolled across Anya's datapad. "Go now." Moving through the rain-slicked, deserted streets of the Archive District felt like stepping into a forgotten world. The university, once the vibrant heart of human knowledge, was now a sterile, automated monument to a time before Omnigen had declared independent thought inefficient. Anya bypassed the building's outer security with practiced ease, her fingers dancing over a holographic interface. They moved through silent, dust-filled libraries where data crystals sat untouched on shelves. their knowledge rendered obsolete by Omnigen's centralized, curated databanks. They reached the sublevel archive, a vault shielded by a meter of lead-lined concrete. The air grew cold, the familiar hum of the city completely absent. It was a tomb of forgotten information. The server was there, a monolithic black tower, just as Kalen had left it. As Anya began the delicate process of interfacing with the offline system to transfer the massive data files, an alarm blared not from the university, but from their own comms. It was a priority alert from Echo. Trap. They knew. Enforcers inbound. 2 minutes. A cold knot of dread formed in Kalen's stomach. The diversion had been a feint. They hadn't been drawing the enforcers away. They had been walking into a perfectly laid ambush. The mission was blown. They were trapped. How? Anya's voice was a blade of ice, her fingers flying across her datapad, trying to find the source of the leak. They couldn't have tracked us. The scrambler. The route. It was all clean. Not a tracker. A prediction. Echo's text flashed on the screen. Stark and immediate. They didn't follow you. They were waiting for you. Omnigen's threat analysis AI must have modeled your most logical move. They anticipated you'd go for the data. The hum of the city, absent in the shielded vault, seemed to return as a phantom vibration in Kalen's bones, the sound of the cage door swinging shut. 2 minutes. He looked at the server, then at the transfer progress bar on Anya's datapad. It was barely at 20%. They wouldn't make it. Leave it, Kalen said, his voice grim. We have to get out of here. No, Anya shot back, not looking up from her work. Her face was illuminated by the frantic scroll of code, a picture of defiant concentration. We don't get a second chance. If we run now, this data stays buried, and everyone we've lost dies for nothing. She slammed a new module onto her datapad, her movements sharp and economical. I can accelerate the transfer, but I'll have to bypass the sequential protocols. It's risky. It could corrupt the files. Do it, Kalen said without hesitation, the sound of heavy. Rhythmic footsteps echoed from the corridor above them, growing steadily closer. The enforcers were moving in formation, a wave of black armor and corporate authority. A metallic clang reverberated through the vault as they breached the sub-level entrance. 60 seconds. Echo's message warned. The progress bar jumped, speeding across the screen in a blur of green light. 50%. 70. 90. With a final, triumphant chime. The transfer completed just as the reinforced vault door behind them began to hiss, the locking mechanism slowly disengaging under a powerful plasma torch. Got it, Anya breathed, yanking her connection cable and shoving the datapad into her pack. Now what? Academic. Any brilliant escape plans in that big brain of yours? Kalen's eyes scanned the tomb-like room. There were no other exits, no ventilation shafts large enough for a person, just walls of concrete and shelves of obsolete knowledge. His gaze fell upon the server rack they had just emptied. It was connected to the vault's independent power conduit, a massive, high-voltage line that ran directly to a geothermal vent deep beneath the city. It was a relic of a pre-Omnigen era designed for energy redundancy. The conduit, he said, a desperate, half-formed idea taking shape. What's its output? Anya's eyes widened as she understood. She pulled up the building schematics on her pad. Massive, enough to power a small city for a day. But it's shielded, and the access panel is. Her voice trailed off as she looked at the vault door, which was now glowing a dull, angry red at its center. There was no time. The enforcers burst in, a phalanx of black shields and raised pulse rifles, their helmet-mounted optics cutting through the dim light. On the ground, now! The lead commander's synthesized voice boomed. Resistance is non-compliant. Instead of dropping, Kalen did the last thing they expected. He grabbed a heavy, metal data crystal reader from a nearby shelf and hurled it with all his might, not at the enforcers, but at a glass-encased fire suppression panel on the far wall. The glass shattered, and a cascade of thick, white foam began to erupt from nozzles in the ceiling, instantly filling the room with a disorienting, vision-obscuring cloud. The enforcer, each momentarily blinded, hesitated. It was the only opening they would get. "Go," Anya yelled, already sprinting towards the main power conduit. While the foam created chaos, Kalen ran to the vault door's control panel. He didn't try to open it. He did the opposite. He slammed his fist on the emergency lockdown, overriding the enforcer's torch. With a deep groan, a series of meter-thick titanium bolts shot from the walls, sealing the vault completely. They had just locked themselves in with a dozen heavily armed soldiers. But they had also bought themselves a few precious seconds. Anya was already at the conduit's access panel, her fingers a blur as she bypassed the manual locks. With a loud crackle of static, she tore the panel off, exposing a thick, braided cable humming with barely contained energy. "It's a direct feed," she shouted over the hiss of the foam and the enraged pounding on the vault door. "If I sever it, the resulting energy discharge will fry every system in this vault, including us." "Don't sever it!" Kalen yelled back, his mind racing, connecting disparate pieces of information: the geothermal vent, the high-voltage cable, the nature of silicate data. Connect to it. Use the crystal. What? That's insane. The power surge would vaporize it. No, it won't. Kalen was now beside her, pulling the obsidian crystal from his pocket. It's not a human data shard. It's a crystalline matrix. It's designed to channel energy. That's how they communicate. Through focused resonance. We're not going to destroy the power line. We're going to turn it into a transmitter. It was a wild, desperate gamble. A theory born from a decade of studying a language of light and energy. Anya stared at him, then at the crystal, then at the approaching enforcers, who were now using thermal optics to see through the foam. She saw the terrifying, brilliant logic in his madness. With a curse that was half prayer, she began to modify her datapad, rerouting its interface to act as a bridge between the raw power of the conduit and the crystalline structure of the shard. "This is going to be loud," she warned, jamming a set of modified connectors against the live conduit. Sparks flew, a brilliant, blinding arc of blue-white electricity that lit the room like a miniature sun. She then connected the other end to the crystal, which Kalen held in a pair of insulated tongs. The moment the connection was made, the small obsidian shard began to glow, first with a soft, internal light, then with an intensity that forced them to shield their eyes. The resonant hum it emitted climbed in pitch until it was a piercing, pure tone that vibrated through the very floor. The crystal was absorbing the raw power of the geothermal line, turning itself into a broadcast antenna of unimaginable power. Now, Anya screamed. Kalen, using her datapad, opened the data file, the full, unredacted truth of Viridia, and poured it into the incandescent crystal. The Silicate Scout's silent scream of light, magnified 1,000,000 times. erupted from the crystal. It wasn't a broadcast of radio waves or microwaves. It was a wave of pure, structured resonance. A data shriek. It shot upwards, unimpeded by the concrete and steel of the city above, passing through the infrastructure like a ghost. It was a form of communication so alien and so powerful that none of Omnigen's conventional sensors could even detect it. The wave of data and raw energy overloaded every system in the vault. The lights exploded. The Enforcer's pulse rifles sparked and died. Their armor's electronic systems fried. The pounding on the door ceased. For a moment, there was a deafening silence, broken only by the crackle of dying electronics. Then, with a final explosive pop, the obsidian crystal shattered into a million pieces of glowing dust. Its purpose served. The vault was plunged into absolute darkness and silence. They had done it. They had sent the message. But they had also just declared war on a corporation that controlled the world, and they were trapped at ground zero, using the faint, residual glow from the dust of the shattered crystal. They made their way past the stunned and disarmed enforcers, who were fumbling in the dark, their technological superiority rendered useless. Lena's voice crackled to life in Anya's earpiece, the first sound from the outside world. What in the hell was that? Every sensor south of the meridian just went blind. It felt like the whole city shook. Phase 1 is complete, Anya replied, her voice strained but steady. We're dark and we're trapped. We need an exit. Now, there was a pause. Silas is on his way. Lena's voice came back. All business. He's bringing the thunder. The thunder arrived 5 minutes later in the form of a stolen, heavily armored maglev transport, the kind used for hauling raw ore in the industrial sector. Silas didn't bother with the door. He drove the massive vehicle straight through the exterior wall of the archive building, creating a cloud of dust and a gaping hole to the street. They scrambled through the breach and into the transport's cargo bay, just as citywide sirens began to scream. A coordinated hunting cry. Everyone hold on. Silas grunted from the cockpit, and the transport shot into a service tunnel, its powerful electromagnets sending it hurtling through the city's arteries at terrifying speed. Back in the relative safety of Echo's server room, the aftermath of their broadcast began to ripple through the network. Echo's screens were a cascade of information. Your data shriek didn't just go out. His text scrolled. It went everywhere. It bypassed the orbital relays and hit every deep space comm buoy in the system. The outer colonies have it. The independent freighter guilds have it. Hell. A new line of text appeared. I'm picking up a response. From the silicates. Kalen leaned closer to the screen. A new pattern was emerging from the static of deep space. A calm, powerful, and intricate pulse of light and frequency. It wasn't the chaotic scream of the scouts recording. It was a formal, structured transmission. It was a species that had been silent for 5 years, suddenly choosing to speak. He didn't have his matrix, but after a lifetime of study, he could read the base emotional resonance of their language. And the tone of this message was not one of gratitude. It was one of cold, ancient anger. They're not thanking us, Kalen said, a new, more profound dread dawning in his heart. They already knew. They knew about Omnigen's betrayal. Anya looked at him, confused. Then why did they sign the accord? Why stay silent for 5 years? Because they weren't the only ones who were broken, Kalen murmured, the terrible truth of it falling into place. The shattered host, They're not a rogue faction. They're a symptom, a schism. Our war didn't just kill humans. It broke their society in two. The collective signed the accord to stop the bleeding, to prevent a civil war. They chose peace with their enemies to avoid a war with themselves. The broadcast hadn't just exposed Omnigen's lie to humanity. It had exposed the Silicate Collective's lie to their own people. It had proven that the Shattered Host's violent paranoia was justified all along. The data shriek hadn't been a spark for a human revolution. It had been the spark for a Silicate civil war, and it was about to spill over into the human world. A priority alert, flagged from Omnigen's own high command network, flashed across Echo's main screen. It was a fleet-wide directive. Protocol Crimson. Crystalline entity detected on intercept course with orbital ring. Hostile intent confirmed. All fleets, converge and engage. It started, Silas rumbled, staring at the schematic of an approaching Silicate warship. Lena stood by the door, her hand resting on her sidearm. You wanted a fire. Academic, she said, her voice devoid of emotion. Looks like you got one. The hum of the city, the sound of the cage, was about to be drowned out by the scream of sirens and the thunder of war. A war they had just single-handedly ignited. The city above them was tearing itself apart. Echo's screens became a mosaic of panic and violence as the truth of Viridia collided with the terror of the impending Silicate attack. Omnigen's propaganda machine, in its death throes, roared to life one last time, flooding the public networks with a new, venomous narrative. Kalen's face, the stranger's face Jax had given him, was plastered everywhere, labeled not just a fugitive, but a traitor, an alien sympathizer who had deliberately provoked the Silicate attack to destabilize human society. Riots erupted as fear battled rage. Some citizens, armed with the truth, stormed Omnigen plazas. Others, consumed by terror, formed mobs, hunting for anyone who looked like a dissenter. The fragile, controlled peace of the Accord had shattered, and the shards were drawing blood. In the quiet hum of Echo's server room, Kalen stared at the Silicate transmission, the elegant, furious pulse of light that held the fate of two species. He saw past the anger, past the threat. He saw a conversation. They're not just attacking, he said, his voice a low, focused murmur. They're broadcasting a question. They're demanding to know why the rest of humanity is silent. They think our silence is complicity. What's to be silent about? Silas growled, checking the charge on his pulse rifle. Omnigen screwed them over. We get it. But opening fire on the whole planet isn't a question. It's a death sentence. It is to them, Kalen insisted, his mind working faster than it ever had. Their entire society is based on collective consensus. To them, a crime committed by the leadership is a crime committed by the whole species, unless the rest of the species actively refutes it. We showed them the lie, but we haven't shown them our truth. Anya looked up from a schematic of the orbital ring, her face grim. And how do you propose we do that? Send them a strongly worded letter. Their lead warship will be in firing range in less than an hour. We answer them, Kalen said, his gaze locking with hers. We answer in their own language. The data shriek was a scream. Now we need a voice. We need to broadcast a message of resonance, not just of data. His eyes drifted to the schematic on her screen, and a final, terrifying piece of the puzzle clicked into place. And we're going to use the gun they shot us with to do it. Anya followed his gaze. The T7 control nexus, she breathed. a look of horrified understanding on her face. "On the orbital ring. You want to go up there into the middle of the naval engagement. Kalen, that's not a mission. That's suicide. It's the only place with a power source stable enough to modulate a resonant signal," he argued, his voice ringing with desperate certainty. "And it's the only symbol that matters. We have to turn their weapon of betrayal into an instrument of peace. It's the only way they'll listen." There was a heavy silence in the room, the weight of his insane proposal pressing down on them. They had started a fire, and now he was asking them to walk into the heart of the inferno. Lena, who had been silently observing, was the first to move. She checked the seals on her vacuum suit. "The orbital elevators will be on military lockdown," she said, her tone professional, as if discussing a routine infiltration. "But the old sky freight tubes are still operational. Redundant system. They're unpressurized and unmonitored. If we can get to the spaceport, we can ride one up." Silas slammed a fresh power pack into his rifle with a decisive click. "I'll clear a path," he rumbled. The journey through the convulsing city was a descent into hell. They moved through rioting mobs and past squads of panicked, trigger-happy enforcers, a small island of purpose in a sea of chaos. Silas was a force of nature, using the armored transport to plow through barricades, while Lena, a ghost in the urban storm, guided them through forgotten service tunnels and crumbling infrastructure, always one step ahead of the closing net. They reached the deserted cargo spaceport, a cavernous ruin of rusted gantries and silent cranes. Just as the first explosions rocked the upper atmosphere, the battle for the orbital ring had begun. The ride up the freight tube was a violent, shuddering ascent in a glorified metal box, the city falling away beneath them like a shattered circuit board. Through the reinforced porthole, they could see the war in heaven. Omnigen fighters, sleek and silver, swarmed like angry wasps around the monolithic silicate warship. The crystalline vessel was a thing of terrifying beauty, a mountain of shifting facets that absorbed and refracted the energy bolts of the human fleet, answering with beams of its own incandescent rage that sliced through the smaller ships with contemptuous ease. The freight tube docked with a jarring clang at a maintenance airlock on the outer edge of the orbital ring. The station was on high alert, its corridors bathed in the blood-red glow of emergency lighting. Alarms blared, a constant, shrieking counterpoint to the percussive thunder of the battle raging just outside the viewport. "The Nexus is in the central command spire, 3 sectors away," Anya said, her voice tight in their comms as she sliced through the airlock security. "We'll have to cross the primary observation deck. It's going to be exposed." Their progress was a blur of controlled violence. They moved like ghosts through the chaos, Silas providing brutal, efficient cover, while Lena neutralized automated defense turrets and security patrols with silent, deadly grace. They reached the observation deck, a vast, curved space with a floor-to-ceiling window that offered a god's-eye view of the battle. For a moment, they all froze, mesmerized by the terrible spectacle. The silicate ship, wounded and glowing with internal fires, was now being swarmed by the bulk of the Omnigen fleet. "They're sacrificing the entire ring to stop it," Silas murmured in awe. Suddenly, a voice echoed through the deck speakers, a voice Kalen knew all too well, cold, calm, and utterly self-assured. It was Marcus Thorne, Omnigen's CEO, broadcasting a live address from a secure bunker on Earth. "Citizens," Thorne's holographic face appeared on the deck's emergency displays. Witness the cost of treason. The terrorist Kalen Vance has brought this alien scourge upon us. But do not despair. Omnigen is your shield. We will purge this threat, and from the ashes of this necessary sacrifice, we will build a stronger, more secure humanity. He's using this. Kalen realized with a surge of cold fury. He's using the war he started to cement his power. Their moment of stunned silence was broken by the arrival of Omnigen's elite guard, soldiers in gleaming white armor, better trained and better equipped than any enforcer. They poured onto the deck, penning the team in. "There are too many," Lena hissed, firing her pulse pistol from behind a support column. "Go," Silas roared, stepping out from cover. He activated a heavy plasma projector he'd salvaged from the transport. "I'll give you a firing lane." He unleashed a torrent of white-hot energy, forcing the elite guard back, creating a momentary breach in their line. "Silas, no," Anya cried. "I started my career following bad orders," he yelled back, his face grim but resolute. "I'm not ending it that way." Lena didn't hesitate or assist. She grabbed Anya by the arm. "Don't let it be for nothing." She and Kalen followed, sprinting across the deck as Silas's plasma projector bought them precious seconds. They heard him roar one last time, a sound of defiance, followed by the blinding flash of an overloading power core. They didn't look back. They reached the T7 Nexus, a sterile circular room dominated by a massive control console. As Anya frantically began to interface with the weapon system, more guards appeared at the far end of the corridor. Lena met them head-on, her movements a fluid, deadly dance of blades and silenced pistol shots. "Get it done. Academic," was the last thing Kalen heard her say before the corridor erupted in a storm of plasma fire. "They're gone," Anya said, her voice hollow, her fingers never slowing. "They bought us our shot. Don't miss." "I won't," Kalen said, connecting his datapad to her interface. He didn't have the crystal anymore, but he had the next best thing, the memory of its structure, its resonant frequency. He began to write a new algorithm, not to transmit data, but to modulate the mining beam's energy into a pure, focused wave of harmonic resonance, a signal that would feel not like a weapon or a message, but like a thought, a memory. He poured everything into it, the raw data from the scout's recording, the scientific beauty of Alara's research, the sharp, unending pain of his own grief. He wasn't just telling them what happened, he was showing them. He was translating the concept of a broken heart into a language of pure energy. He was making them feel the human cost of the lie. Anya rerouted the primary power. The entire orbital ring shuddered as the T7 beam, the silent fire that had started it all, powered up. But instead of a beam of destruction, a focused, invisible wave of pure, empathetic resonance shot from the spire, passing through the chaos of the battle and striking the heart of the silicate warship. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the crystalline vessel's relentless assault ceased. The beams of rage died. It hung in space, silent, absorbing the message. The entire battlefield fell quiet, the Omnigen fighters holding their fire, their pilots watching in stunned disbelief. On the planet below, Echo watched it all. He had bypassed Thorne's propaganda feed, and on every screen in Neo-Alexandria, he broadcast the live, unedited tactical feed from the orbital ring, the silent, waiting fleets, the sudden, impossible peace. Then he added a single, scrolling line of text beneath it. The truth is not a weapon. It is a bridge. Ask yourself who profits from burning it down. The lie was broken. Thorne's narrative had collapsed. Omni-Gen's authority, built on a foundation of controlled fear, evaporated in an instant of profound, shared silence. On the dying orbital ring, Kalen and Anya stood in the quiet of the Nexus, the echoes of their friend's sacrifice hanging heavy in the air. A private comm channel opened on their console. It was a silicate transmission, directed only at them. Kalen read the serene, complex light. It was not a message of forgiveness, nor of alliance. It was a single, resonant concept. Begin. They found a long-range shuttle, its systems miraculously intact. As they pulled away from the shattered ring, leaving the silent standoff behind them, Kalen looked back at the Earth. The hum of the city was gone from his mind, replaced by a vast, uncertain quiet. He hadn't brought back the world he had lost. He had shattered it completely. But in its place, for the first time in 5 years, there was the possibility of something new, something honest, something earned. He and Anya, the academic and the engineer, were no longer fugitives. They were ambassadors to a future no one had ever imagined, tasked with the first, difficult word in a new conversation. The cost had been immeasurable, but for the first time, looking out at the star-dusted dark, Kalen Vance felt the ghost of a real peace